Alright, so all these motor abilities are all going to basically diverge into mass and velocity versions. So we're going to cover C1 first. So the C1 motor ability, we have the mass and we have the velocity version of C1. We're going to use the squat exercise to kind of illustrate like all these different concepts. So when I look at the C1, remember we're going from a relaxed to a concentric dominated movement. So traditionally we would consider this to be like a box squat, for example. So remember, the body produces lower forces and higher velocities during concentric movements. So we're going to start from the lowest force version, and then we're going to kind of basically work our way up the force velocity curve as we go through all these different movements. So C1, so basically with a C1 we're going from here and we're trying to hit like a high velocity form of the squat. So in the simplest term, we're just going for a jump squat. We just want to make sure that we're not loading the muscles before we do the movement. So what we're going to do is we're going to lean forward. We're going to try to not put our weight on our legs yet. So like with a squat, we're just going to kind of lean forward into the exercise, get our weight kind of centered up, and then we're going to jump up. And that's all the C1 velocity movement's going to be. You just want to make sure that when you do this, you're trying to minimize loading the muscles as much as possible. So you don't want to be here and you're basically already supporting all your body weight on your legs, and then you're doing the movement, because then you're basically making it a C2 exercise. So make sure that however you set it up, when you do your jump squat, you set up so that you can basically lift your legs off the floor and it's not a big deal. So that way when you initiate the jump, you're going from that truly relaxed position, or as close to it as possible, into that concentric movement. And basically the whole point of that is, you're trying to train the body to shift that force time curve to the left as much as possible. That's what you're going for. So that's kind of the whole point of that exercise. Likewise, and then we go to the mass-based version of it, and the mass version, you're just going to get a barbell. So the mass version of this exercise, it's the exact same thing. You're not loading the muscle, you're not loading your legs with any kind of force. You're just you should be able to basically lift your legs up off the floor. And then you're going from that relaxed position and you're trying to stand up as fast as possible. So here, and you stand up. Obviously, the more weight that you load onto the bar and the higher the external load, you're going to produce more force, but your velocity is going to slow down. And we can kind of fine-tune how we want these training effects to match our goals. So if our goals are, generally speaking, we're training more for the higher force production end of the spectrum, and we don't really care so much about velocity, well, in that case, the velocity version of the exercise, because there's no hard and fast cutoffs, we determine what the mass and velocity version of that exercise is going to be. So for some people, the high mass version, the mass version of doing, your weighted C1 exercise, you might be going really heavy weight, and you're coming up pretty slow, and you're giving your body, you're giving your body a fair amount of time to develop the level of force that it needs. And the velocity version of it just might be a lighter version of that, where you're not even necessarily jumping, you're just using a lighter load and you're trying to achieve a higher peak velocity with your squat. Yeah, you see this frequently with people that use like bands in their training. Likewise, like if we shift over to the velocity side of the spectrum, the C1 version of that exercise, the velocity-based one might be where we're starting from relaxed, we're trying to jump as high as we can. And then our mass-based version of that exercise could very well be something where we're just adding a little bit of external load, maybe just the empty bar, and we're just jumping up and barely leaving the ground with it. If your goals are going to be geared more towards like muscle hypertrophy and strength, you're gonna focus more on kind of those slower muscle contraction velocities and those higher loads. Whereas if your goals are more like speed and jumping and that kind of stuff, you're going to shift more towards the velocity end of the spectrum. So the mass-based version of it, you're going to produce higher force. The velocity-based version of it, you're going to produce less force but higher velocities. And we can move those 2 points around on the curve by changing the velocity profile of the exercise, and we do that by changing the external load that's used. So next video we'll cover C2 movements.